So I got some really revealing news for the future of Larian Studios. Let's just jump right into it. So Sven Vinka, the owner and creative director of Larian Studios, just had an interview with GameSpot at the GDC conference, and I'll leave a link to this video down below. It's a really good watch. It's 24 minutes long. I do suggest that you guys watch it, but in this video I am going to summarize all of the big talking points. Man, we have a few things to talk about here, but do note that there's nothing fancy with this video, no crazy edits or anything. All you got to do is just listen with your ears. But wait, what else would you listen with? Let's start off with the two elephants in the room. First up being DLCs, which will not exist for Baldur's Gate 3. Now, for some of you guys, this is going to be sad news, but I promise you, if you listen to the rest of this video, you will probably walk away with a smile on your face. So Larian has never been a DLC company, at least not in the last decade or so. I'm not exactly sure about their earlier days. And one major part of this is that Sven takes on the philosophy of, let's not spend our time rehashing old things. Let's change our focus, move on, and most importantly, improve. Now, the funny thing is that Sven actually said in this interview that he was considering a DLC for Baldur's Gate 3 after the game's initial success, but he ultimately decided to go back to his fundamentals for game design, which clearly work, might I add, and that they're not going to be doing a BG3 DLC. On a side note, Larian is also a company that has the philosophy of, you buy our games once and you own them for life. They even stated this firmly at the DICE Awards.
We ask you to pay one price only for the game, and that's it. You can own it for the rest of your life.
Although many of us don't mind paying for good DLCs, I think Larian's philosophy on this is rather honorable, especially nowadays where so many companies seem to have the philosophy of, let's turn our game into a live service game and try to drain every penny out of everybody's coin purse for as long as we possibly can. Now, moving on to the next elephant in the room. Baldur's Gate 4 also won't exist. I'm so sorry, y'all, to reveal this news to you guys. I feel bad. It's at least not going to exist by Larian Studios. Have a listen to Sven.
Can you tell us anything about it, or can you?
No, I can't.
What it isn't? What it is?
Well, it's not Baldur's Gate 4. It's not Dungeons and Dragons.
So no Baldur's Gate 4, but I'm sure that many of you also didn't miss when he said no Dungeons and Dragons. So it's official, out of Larian, they're not going to be involved with D&D, the Forgotten Realms setting, Baldur's Gate 4, etc., at least for their next project. Now, of course, the easy guess here is that Larian is going to continue on with their Divinity series. Divinity Original Sin 1 was good. DOS 2 brought Larian to a new level, which made BG3 possible. And what better time than now to return to that franchise? Baldur's Gate 3 was a huge success, but it's also not completely theirs. They had to obtain a license, which I'm sure wasn't cheap, as Larian does not own D&D or the Forgotten Realms setting. What they do own, though, is their Divinity franchise, which they started laying the foundation for as they were developing their first Divinity game, Divine Divinity, from way back in 2002. And after that came Beyond Divinity, Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, Divinity 2 Flames of Vengeance, Divinity Dragon Commander, and then, of course, Divinity Original Sin 1, and the highly successful Divinity Original Sin 2, which is what made Baldur's Gate 3 possible. Continuing on with the Divinity series and having that foundation for a world and lore and history already established and created would save a lot of time at the writing table. Not to mention, there's already plenty of fans that are invested into the Divinity franchise. But with that said, who really knows, though? Maybe Larian is obtaining another IP, or they could be creating an entirely new universe. My guess is as good as yours. So no Baldur's Gate 4, no DLCs, but don't worry, we have some really cool stuff to talk about here momentarily. Baldur's Gate 3 is now a relic of the past to be enjoyed for many, many, many years to come, but it's cemented in history now. Baldur's Gate 3 is what it is. Larian doesn't play around when they say that you buy our games, you own them for life. We might get like a definitive edition or something like that at some point in the future, but for the most part, Baldur's Gate 3 is what it is. But let's continue on with what else was revealed in terms of their future and their next project. And let's start off with Larian's approach to their next game's development. So Sven said that they're going to be taking a similar approach to their next game as they have in the past, like with Baldur's Gate 3, where they'll work heavily on an Act 1 or earlier part of the game, release that huge chunk of content into early access, let us players mess with it like we did with Baldur's Gate 3, take that player feedback and the data, and then finish the rest of the game. I don't think I could say this for any other company out there, but this actually gets me really excited. Early access for Baldur's Gate 3 is a really fun period for us players that participated in it, but that doesn't really matter. What really matters is that this development strategy works really well for Larian and their type of games, but it also works really well for us consumers as it led to this behemoth of Baldur's Gate 3. Without early access, I would almost bet money on it that, well, actually I would bet money on it that you would not have seen the Baldur's Gate 3 that we actually got. It would have been much, much worse. Now, many companies, unfortunately, do the exact opposite with early access. They take their money, they take advantage of their consumers, and then they stop caring. But Larian is not many companies. So as of now, early access seems very, very likely for their next project, and you bet your ass I'll be covering everything that we get on it. I'm pretty excited for that. Larian, make sure to do the Panel from Hells again, please. Comment down below in the comments if you guys want more Panel from Hell type shows. Let's show Larian how much those actually meant to us consumers and us fans. They were just a great time, really good marketing strategy. It's a win-win. As for how long this game is going to take, how long it will take to develop, well, Sven actually said that they have ambitious goals of creating games in 3 years, but 4 years would be more of a reasonable expectation or goal that would make them happy. So as of now, I'd say the estimate for Larian's next big game would be 2028, which would be 4 years from now, but maybe even a little bit longer because things hardly ever go as planned. Now, looking back at Baldur's Gate 3, which took about 6 years in total, Baldur's Gate 3's cinematic nature was so vastly more complex than DOS 2 was, and this meant that Larian was in a bit of a learning phase trying to make this work for their game. But now they have successfully figured a lot of that out, which will save them time for their next project. And also, don't forget, Baldur's Gate 3 was developed during the COVID days. The war in Ukraine certainly didn't help. Don't forget, Larian had a studio in Russia, the St. Petersburg studio, which is no longer listed on the website. It completely closed. This was a huge thing to deal with business-wise. The laws were really wacky, and Sven said that they relocated almost everyone from their St. Petersburg studio to other Larian studios. But even more importantly, many of the Larian devs had loved ones that were greatly affected by the war, which is, of course, not good and very distracting when you're trying to make a game. Google also discontinued Stadia, which cost Larian a lot of wasted time, and also just the general complexity and innovation behind Baldur's Gate 3 created many, many obstacles. Many of these obstacles we hope that Larian won't have to overcome as much for their next game. Now, the great thing about Larian, and Sven even talked about this in the interview, is that Larian is an introspective company. They actively seek to continue to improve themselves with each game, and Larian's track record is evidence of this. Even if we don't go back that far and we just go to Divinity Original Sin 1, DOS 1 was a really good game according to most that played it, but then they blew DOS 1 out of the water with Divinity Original Sin 2, and then they blew DOS 2 out of the water, actually out of the stratosphere, with Baldur's Gate 3. Larian definitely has plans to keep that evolution going, although Sven wouldn't tell us exactly what the big gimmick for their next game is going to be. But Sven did tell us a few more things about it. First, let's start off with Baldur's Gate 3 did put a lot of pressure on Larian for their next game, because how do you get better than Baldur's Gate 3 or even make a game on a similar level? And perhaps Larian doesn't actually end up doing that, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing for Baldur's Gate 3 to be the crown jewel. But with that said, Larian seems to be pretty damn dedicated to making their next project top tier. Let me play you a quick short clip from the interview.
At what point did you start thinking about what's next for the studio?
Before we started. So
Okay.
this was part of a larger plan that I have towards what I call the very big RPG that will dwarf them all.
Oh, so Baldur's Gate isn't that RPG?
No.
Wow.
No, but it's a very long plan, complicated.
So a very big RPG that will dwarf them all. Holy crap, the future is bright for Larian Studios. Their next game may not be that ultimate RPG, but it's certainly on the staircase going up to it. So that's freaking exciting. For Larian's next game, one of their main problems is how do they keep being so ambitious without constraining themselves from not doing too much? And actually, Sven said that he had a recent meeting with his directors, and they had come to the conclusion that they were trying to do too much, and that could end up being the downfall of the game. So whatever Larian's next project is, it seems like they're shooting for the stars again and actually are having to pull themselves back a little bit at the moment. And that's actually really good news to me. Another thing that stood out to me in the interview in regards to their next game is that Sven said that I can guarantee you that the plans that we have, there's a lot of risk in there, which means that this next project or even projects will definitely be trying some new innovative things. So I hate to be the one to break the news to you guys that there's going to be no Baldur's Gate 3 DLCs. And also those of you guys that had your eyes set on Larian making Baldur's Gate 4, you might have to turn your sight elsewhere. I don't know if there'd be any company that would be willing to take on Baldur's Gate 4 in the near future, because the pressure would be insane to have to match or do better than Baldur's Gate 3. But maybe far off in the future, 10-15 years, we might see a Baldur's Gate 4. Regardless, the future for Larian Studios looks pretty damn bright, and whatever they do, I'm sure that it's going to be really, really exciting and top quality. Let's hope that Larian can keep this trajectory going for many, many years to come. As always, I will be covering all of the upcoming games that Larian talks about or does. I'm really excited for that early access phase. It hurts to say that sometimes, just because so many companies do take advantage of early access, but with Larian, it's just different. If you don't like it, just don't participate in it. Wait for the full launch. And I promise you, everybody that did participate in early access was a help towards making the game that actually releases the game that it became. Catch you all in the next one.